Now I will introduce Marie-Claude Ducap, who is a founder and the head of Aléas. Alias is our partner for this session, and Alias is a Canadian leader in international mobility risk management. And so, of course, Marie-Claude is a specialist of all of the questions that we have dealt with for several minutes about students' mobility risk, of course. And I think that it will be very interesting to listen to you, Marie-Claude, because your expertise is a great expertise in this field, and it will be very fruitful for all our universities to listen to you. Thank you very much for being present and for our partnership.
Merci, François. Ça me fait vraiment plaisir. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Well, good morning for us. We are located just north of Montreal in the cold fall of Canada. So I'm a bit jealous of all of you. Andres was saying that in Mexico, it's nice and warm this morning. So I need to go for tea with you. We need to catch up. Very, very happy to be here. What you've been talking about is of course, a passion for me. I'm just going to share, we've put together a little presentation, so I'm going to share my screen rapidly with you. There you go. Awesome. So we've been talking about strategies and with the panel this morning, solutions in light of the pandemic. Where I want to bring you in the next 20-25 minutes is on a more pragmatic way of looking at the pandemic. And François' question was a good intro to our presentation. How are you structured when it comes to answering crises within your institution? I know that a lot of your institutions have suffered in February, March, April because of having to repatriate students and employees all around the world, having to make very difficult decisions. And I think it's very important to learn from what you've just experienced in the last couple months. If I'm happy to see on the list of participants that many of you have participated in one of our webinars that we held in August, I believe, or maybe early September. Time flies. And we were discussing September. There you go, September. Well, we were discussing the importance of doing a debriefing after intervening on a crisis. What we discussed at the IFCU and I was to probably bring you more pragmatic information as to how to structure your organization when it comes to answering to a crisis. So this is me with my pre-pandemic hair, a lot shorter. It's more difficult to head to the hairdresser these days. So I get the long look. You can add me on LinkedIn, please do so. We share a lot of information. We write articles, especially there's one coming up on the pandemic being a multiplying factor in the sense that it's not only a biomedical risk. There are many risks and threats that are arising from COVID-19. So that might be an interesting article for you to read. So add me on LinkedIn. I'm going to be sharing this over the next couple of days, I believe, maybe, yes, days. So rapidly, who we are, François did a really good introduction. We are the Canadian leader when it comes to international mobility risk management. We work with several Canadian institutions all across the country, them being universities, colleges, even high schools. And we also have two other brands that we carry. We have the Aléas campus, which is our online platform on which we provide training. It can be training for managers, training for travelers. So there's all sorts of training available for all of you. Of course, we do deliver training en français. We deliver training in English, pero también en español. So if you wish, you can have a look at what we do. And we also have our certification. I was talking earlier on about how important it is to have a safe ecosystem. So at Aléas, we are proud to contribute to that by providing certification to institutions, providers, stakeholders that are safe and diligent with their safety practices. So if it's something you're interested in, write us. We'll be more than happy to share the details with you. But when it comes to a strategy of safety, how do you organize it? So we've come up with a little diagram that you may want. I believe this session is recorded, so you're going to have access to this after our session, but also if you go on our website, you will have access to that. This is how we operationalize risk management when it comes to international activities. So you see there's your governance, so your policies and your general, your principles, general principles, and then depending on your safety positionings, those it'll trickle down in prevention and crisis management. Prevention is about having foresight, and many of you have mentioned this morning, how could we know about the pandemic? Well, the World Health Organization called it, by the way, but probably not at this amplitude. However, there's a need for you to put in place some preventive and management measures, and that is country safety guides, evaluating your stakeholders. Frank was saying it's important to have good partners. I highly believe in that. It's important to have less partners, but of high quality. So you want to take the time to get to know your partners, understand whose responsibilities whose, and sign good agreements in which your safety roles are clearly established. When it comes to crisis management, you want to have a, as Kirk was calling it, a critical incident framework. We call it an international crisis management protocol. So, and we'll discuss that a little bit furthermore. And though that protocol should be relying on a set of standard operating procedures, and having one, for instance, for COVID-19, for a pandemic, is very important. Of course, that is in light of relaunching international activities, which actually is the case in Canada. We have a federal website on which it says, do not travel abroad other than for essential activities. Education is an essential activity. So a lot of Canadian institutions have positioned themselves in the sense that if you are, if by not going abroad, you are putting at stake your graduation, it actually becomes an essential activity, and the potential for going abroad is back on the table. So that could be an interesting position to look into for your university as well. The slide here is nothing magical. I think if we would have had the time to discuss the institutional risks of managing poorly your risks, we would have all come up with these elements. Of course, you want to avoid psychological and physical injuries for your travelers. You want to avoid legal proceedings. You don't want to lose your credibility. That is more for reputational risk. You want to keep your stakeholders. You want to protect them, and having not managing well your risk might have an important impact on those. Andres, you were talking about when you when the pandemic hit, you had to improvise. So it's not about not improvising. Managing risk is always about improvising, but you want to reduce it. One example I always use in Canada and North America, there's a very popular activity. It's called improv night. And those teams are great at improvising, but the reason why the reason of their greatness is because they train. They have structure. They know how to start an improv. They know how to end it. So that's what you want. You want to manage your risk in the sense that you want to reduce your improvisation. And what you want is to keep your activities going. So managing poorly your risk will have an impact on that. So when you do have some protocols in place, it does not actually rule out completely risky situations. One of my favorite things to say is zero risk does not exist. And I know you all know that already. And regardless of the destination, the type of activity that your travelers take part in, crisis situations can occur. Just quickly, a quick stat here is 80% of incidents that happen abroad to travelers is linked to transportation. So some of our institutions that we work with perceive risk in a completely different manner. You're more afraid of a terrorist attack, whereas to me, you should be more conscious of the risks that are related to going from point A to point B and walking from point C to point D. So understanding the risk is the real threats is very important. There is also a legal obligation of assisting your travelers with efficiency in many, many countries. It's not all over the world, but it's actually present in 67 countries around the world where there's a legal obligation. It's called due diligence in most of those countries. So to be diligent, you have to know where your travelers are. You need to have two-way communication procedures. You should have a protocol in place, and you should be referring to standard operating procedures. That's just a little drop of everything that should be done if you are constrained by a legal obligation. So having a framework, a protocol, what does it do? Well, it's actually the contrary of what I just said. If you manage poorly your risks, so you're going to be protecting your people, you're going to ensure good stakeholder management, you're going to have a strategy to be efficient when you're going to be facing a crisis, you're going to reduce improvisation, you're going to protect your reputation and your assets and ensure business continuity. So it's very important to take the time right now to sit down and build that protocol. So yes, I'm going to give you what should be part of that protocol. So first off, of course, you need to have revision. You need to have an update mechanism. It needs to be in there. Why? So that it's part of someone's plan, work plan, and you ensure that it's being revised and updated. There's also confidentiality, and I will get back to this in a second as to why it's so important to have it very well labeled. You want to classify very clearly your emergency levels. This can't be subjective. It has to be very objective, because depending on who receives the call or who looks at the situation, it cannot be dependent on the risk threshold of the individual. This should be determined by the institution as a whole. So what is an incident, a minor or a major emergency? And what is an imminent or a potential emergency? You want to build the structure of your crisis cell. What does it look like? Who's in it? Who are your replacements if someone is sick, on a leave, or on vacation? How do you mobilize your crisis cell? And how do you conclude a crisis situation. It's very important to have a debriefing activity and to take care of your people that were involved in a crisis, people that work 24/7 at solving a situation in which a human is. You need to take care of these people as well because they've gone through a potential trauma as well. So you want to have your resources in place. Quickly, how I would potentially suggest to classify your emergency levels. Well, with an incident, I would decentralize how it's being managed, and I would probably give it to my project manager or activity manager. A minor emergency would be managed in collaboration with my project manager and my coordinator, so your international bureau manager, for instance. A major emergency is when you have higher critical impact, and I would actually, that's when I would highly recommend that this is being managed centrally by your crisis cell and have some support with specialized resources and stakeholders. So you want to have your partners involved. And listen, you want to have your partners involved, meaning that when you choose a partner or you consolidate a partnership, this needs to be clear that you're going to need their help and support if something happens abroad to one of your travelers. And when it comes to a potential or imminent situation, some of those situations, like it could be a natural disaster, a pandemic, or even a civil riot. You want to keep it to your project manager so that they do the monitoring. However, you want to inform everyone and be ready to deploy in the event that it turns into a major emergency. So what you want also is to establish some communication procedures. This is just an example. It's just to show you that the arrows are pointing into one direction. They're bidirectional, of course, but your crisis coordinator is not talking to the project manager and the specialist, and the project manager is not talking to two people. It needs to be clear. It needs to be clearly understood who speaks to whom, right? So that's very important. So everyone gets the message that they should get, and no one is sending, no one is receiving messages from two entities. So determining this is a very important one. One other thing that is important is to determine how will you mobilize your crisis cell. So you're going to have a situation in the field. It's going to be reported by XYZ. Then who evaluates the emergency level based on what documents? And then it's being reported to the coordinator and then the crisis manager. That is also an example. So you want to look at those two schemas that I've presented to you and adjust it to the culture of your organization, how it works internally. Where it becomes very interesting, because I feel that it really fits with the answers that that our panelists provided to Francois when he asked, how was your institution structure in terms of crisis response? And our panelists gave very similar answers, being that first off, you have your strategic team. And all of your institutions do have an emergency management protocol. Okay, you have something in place. However, your institution is able to answer to local situations, because you know how it works with local authorities, you know your grounds, you know your culture, you know your customs, you know how everything works as an institution. However, when an incident happened abroad, you know nothing about it. Well, your strategic team is less aware of the differences of how things are being done in a country. That's why you need to have an operations team that comes and support your strategic team, okay? That operations team is your international bureau. In other words, you need to have them to provide the right information to that strategic team so that they make good decisions. I mentioned earlier confidentiality. When you look on the strategic team, you have information and logistics manager. In many institutions, this position, this role is held by the admin assistant. So what's very important is to understand that sometimes topics and information that's discussed with the strategic team is not meant for the operations team. So you need to have one person that speaks to the crisis, we highly recommend that it is your crisis coordinator that speaks to your operations team, and the operations team reports to the crisis coordinator that brings back the information to the strategic team. Depending also on the culture of your organization, it could be one big cell. What's important is that you start thinking about what are the roles that need to be taken on and what are their responsibilities. So maybe your crisis manager and your crisis coordinator would be the same person. It's possible in smaller institutions that could be the case. So what you want is to make sure that the responsibilities are there and the roles are being taken, are being accomplished. I want to take just a second or a minute to discuss the liaison officer. The liaison officer is a very, very important role in an institution. It's the person that will make the liaisons between with the families and the loved ones of victims or of your travelers that are stuck abroad or evacuated, repatriated, or sick. That person has very, very specific skills, and they should be selected carefully and trained. Of course, when it is one student or one traveler that's living a difficult situation abroad, dealing with the family is a little bit easier because you deal with one family or one loved one. However, when it comes to a pandemic, for instance, where it's a lot of travelers and a lot of families, you would want to have someone that's dedicated to that role. Rapidly, standard operating procedures. Andres, you mentioned not having anything in place with COVID-19. That's why it's important to identify, do a good risk analysis of the different threats that are present when you go abroad. Of course, a pandemic, I know very, very little institutions that had something in place prior to March of 2020. But I must tell you that our clients have turned towards us to develop that procedure for them. So there's a real understanding of the importance of having procedures for all sorts of situations, but specifically to a pandemic right now. Those SOPs should be developed and shared amongst your travelers, amongst your stakeholders. It is really great procedures for your crisis cell to rely on. It's sort of a checklist. So you want to develop them by doing a thorough risk analysis at destination. You want to identify the risky situations that are most likely to happen, and then start elaborating different scenarios and the type of reactive behaviors and actions that you would want your affected person to take on, and how your organization would want them to react or support your affected person, your traveler. And you need to inform and train travelers accordingly. So I'm going to use Ecuador as an example. In Canada, when we send students to Ecuador, we train them on how to react in the event of an earthquake. If you send students to Japan, you might want to train them in the event of a tsunami. If you send students to Spain, you want to make them very aware of petty crime and how to react if you are being robbed. So that would be the kind of pre-departure training that would be put in place based on your standard operating procedures. So rapidly, how do we conclude that? I had a very short time. So take the time to develop your crisis management protocol. It's very important. Conduct an activity analysis. We tend to not do them. We tend to put all of our destinations in the same pot. We tend to say, oh, well, Asia is and Africa is. And I know that each of you that are from Asia and Africa are raising an eyebrow because threats are not the same if you are in Tanzania and Sierra Leone, for instance, or Morocco. You want to determine clearly the responsibilities. I see a typo, I apologize for that. The responsibilities amongst all of your stakeholders. You want to be concise, simple, develop a realistic plan based on your resources. Not all institutions have access to the same human resources and financial resources. So if you have limited resources, you might not want to have, you cannot have multiple partners all over the world. You want to have good quality partners, and you want to not take on too many risks because you don't have the resources to answer to your to potential situations that are urgent. You should have efficient communication. So two-way, reliable, accessible at all times. Test your plan with simulation. You just had a great one. It was not a simulation. The pandemic happened for real. So take the time to debrief. Think about what just happened. What worked? What were your shortcomings? And use that to build your protocol. Have a secure information system that you can access remotely. I have a client that all of the information with regards to travelers is in a file in an office. But if something happens on a Saturday where universities in Canada are closed and that person is at home, she has to drive all the way back to the university. And Canadian distances are quite large. You can sometimes live a 90-minute drive away from your workplace. So that is an issue when it comes to efficiency. Think about that. You want to keep an operations log. It's very important. When you answer to a crisis, you need to take down some notes. The best ways to use a technology in which everything's recorded in the same place. So whoever's sending an email or having a phone call, everything's put in the same log. Update your plan. Notify of revisions. So if you update a plan, but you don't send it to your stakeholders or don't inform your professors and travelers, that is not efficient. And as I just said, I cannot say it enough, evaluate your plan each time after deployment. Every time you use it, sit down, look at it, what worked well and what were your shortcomings, and bring the changes that are required. So I think I managed to do it in 20 minutes. And we are ready for questions.
Of course, I will leave the floor to the participants, but I would like to underline some aspects. Of course, you mentioned the necessity of being well prepared, and for that, we must work with specialists because we can't improvise some new protocols or procedures, of course. It's very interesting that you mention the necessity of using an international crisis management protocol, because I think that it could be the purpose of what we will discuss tomorrow about the possibility of creating an academic risk management framework that could be specific for Catholic universities. You mentioned, and Frank mentioned, the necessity of working with key partners. And what Frank was saying is true. All the universities have now many partnerships all around the world. But there is a difference between having just a partnership and knowing well the partner with whom you work. And IFCU, of course, could be one tool, in fact, what tool at the service of our universities for helping them to pool their resources, of course, and for sharing their experiences and working all together so that we can adopt in the future some same procedural protocols. So what you mentioned was very important for that. And I would like also to thank you, Andres, because you mentioned before the collaborative platform. In a few minutes, we will have a presentation of this collaborative platform, thanks to Nicolas. But I think that it is also a tool for all our universities for working in the same direction and for creating this same culture of risk management. So thank you very much, Marie-Claude. I leave the floor to those who want to ask you questions. We have time for that.
Hi, thank you. So I'm from Portugal. And I can really relate with colleagues from Mexico and other Latin America cultures where we rely a lot on improvisation. So, but my question is a bit different. So we have had, not specifically about COVID, but we have a plan and a risk plan. But one thing, it always strikes me as an issue when I speak to American partners, is that here in Europe, we have GDPR. And when we are elaborating these plans, this is usually kind of an obstacle, because in Europe, and the logic of GDPR is privacy over safety. So privacy must be the biggest concern above everything else. So when you were speaking about knowing where people are at all times and those kind of things, and I'm not sure if I understood you correctly, so if that was not the point you were trying to make, I'm sorry, that's what I understood, is that how can you manage the need for privacy as we have it in Europe, and knowing where people are and at all times. And for instance, right now with COVID, we are basically facing a very huge challenge because we need to report positive cases, for instance, to the teachers, but data privacy is an obstacle. So when it comes to COVID, for instance, how do you have any idea how can we overcome this data protection need we all have here in Europe, with the need to keep all the academic community safe from the virus transmission on campus?
Magda, your question is very, very interesting and very, it's very well timed, in the sense that right now at Aléas, we are working with lawyers that are located in Luxembourg and Paris at the actual moment to really understand well the GDPR and understand to what extent are we allowed to have information to protect your people. Because the GDPR is not only one, it's not only one paragraph. It actually has a set of I don't know how to call it, because I'm not yet very familiar with GDPR, but we're working on it right now. And
you don't want to be familiar with GDPR. Talk to our colleagues, and you'll realize you don't want to do that.
So I know that in the next couple of weeks, in the coming months, we will understand better to what extent you're allowed to have information with, and it's not about having the information from my understanding, okay? The problem is not having the information, is what you do with it. And that's where you have to be very careful. And that's what we're trying at Alias to understand well. Because for instance, I'll give you a quick example. We have a great app right now. It's called the Travel Navigator. And the Travel Navigator permits you to know where your travelers are. It doesn't keep history. It just says when you open your dashboard, you know where your people are and you can communicate with them. Other than having their names and email and phone number because you need to communicate with them, it doesn't do anything else. And from our understanding with our lawyers, our app is actually legal to be used with GDPR. It's just about what do we do with the name, phone numbers, and emails afterwards. So just to give you an idea of the kind of questions that we're asking ourselves right now. And Magda, let's talk in January and I'll have a complete answer for you.
Okay, thank you. But I will just add a small point is that you're right, it's what we do with the data. But the thing is that you also need to reduce the number of people that interact with that data. And when it comes to COVID, you need to inform, for instance, the teachers of the students. You also need to inform academic services because the students who are staying in quarantine, they will need to access remote classes. And so after a while, it's very easy to lose track of who has the information. I mean, it's not adding. I think you've answered my question, and in January I'll get back to you for sure. And thank you. And again, good luck with GDPR.
Oh, we need luck. Thank you.
Yeah.
But we're happy to understand it better. This is one of our strengths, right? Understanding things so that we can provide better to you as institutions.